I looked at my phone screen and felt my heart stop. The photo showed my husband sitting in an elegant restaurant, supposedly at a business lunch. But the detail no one could ignore was there. A woman's hand resting on his arm. Red nails, a gold bracelet, a gesture too intimate to be mere coincidence. In that instant, the certainty of betrayal pierced me like a cold blade. For a few seconds, I stood paralyzed, breathless, just staring at that image that screamed louder than 1,000 words. It was as if every lie he'd told in the past few months had materialized before me. He could no longer deny it. He could no longer call me paranoid, as he had so often. Her hand in the photo was the proof I needed, cruel and indisputable. I felt a mixture of anger and silence building inside me. I knew I couldn't explode there, not at that moment. I needed to think, observe, let him sink into the lies he'd constructed. The photo wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much greater revelation, and I was ready to follow every clue. I still had the photo open on the screen when a whirlwind of memories washed over me. It was impossible not to go back to the beginning, when everything seemed perfect. He looked at me as if I were the only woman in the world, and I believed him. Our marriage was seen as an example among friends and family. I never imagined that behind that smile lay such dirty secrets. I remembered mornings when he brought me coffee in bed, the smell of warm bread, the hurried kiss before leaving for work. These were small gestures that made me feel loved, safe, and belonged. He had a gift for enveloping me in promises of eternity. Today, each of these memories seemed to mock me. I also remembered family trips, photos of us smiling side by side. Our children, now adults, believed we were unshakable. Even coworkers would tell me, "You were made for each other." It was as if I'd lived on a stage, unaware that backstage he was rehearsing another play. The "I miss you" messages now sounded false, calculated. I realized he knew exactly what to say to keep me calm. Like an actress, I played my role as a faithful, devoted wife, believing the love was mutual. The discovery of his betrayal ripped the ground from under my feet, but it also opened my eyes. In the last few months, something had changed. Kisses didn't taste the same. Hugs seemed more distant. He would come home and avoid eye contact. I pretended not to notice, afraid of the answer I would get if I asked. Now I understood. He was already sharing his life with someone else while leaving me only the crumbs. The nights grew longer in my memory. Lying next to him, I felt his body cold, his back turned to me. He fell asleep too quickly, as if he wanted to end any possibility of conversation. I tossed and turned in bed restlessly, trying to justify his absence with stress, fatigue, worries. It was self-deception. Work calls became more frequent, always at night, always urgent. I heard his voice changing tone, softer, more intimate. When I approached, he'd hang up, irritated, saying I was suspicious of everything. Today, I know they weren't just business calls. It was her, invading my space without asking permission. He started dressing up more to go out. Expensive perfume, carefully ironed shirts, even a gym workout became part of his routine. I mentally applauded, thinking it was self-care. But the details don't lie. Someone who suddenly starts sprucing up doesn't do it just for vanity. He was living a second life. The hidden messages were another sign. His phone never left his pocket, not even in the bathroom. Passwords changed, notifications disabled, always face down. When I asked, he'd say, "It's work stuff you wouldn't understand." It was as if he were training me to believe I had no right to the truth. His car also gave away clues. I found strands of hair on the seat, a floral scent permeating the upholstery. He'd say they were carpool passengers or teammates. I wanted to believe him, but with each excuse, something inside me died. My intuition was already screaming, but I still didn't have the courage to face it. I remember one night when he arrived late, claiming he'd been stuck in traffic. I saw the reflection of his cell phone illuminating his face. When he lay down, I could smell another scent on his skin, a sweet, lingering scent. I asked, and he laughed. "You're imagining things, darling?" That laugh still echoes like venom. Birthdays became cold. Hastily purchased gifts, memorized phrases. There was no longer any enthusiasm for celebrating with me. Deep down, I understood that he was saving his energy for someone else, for secret meetings, for hidden dinners. With every detail, I became a shadow in his own life. It was impossible not to remember when he swore fidelity. I will never cheat on you. You are the woman of my life. Those words now sounded like cruel irony. Broken promises weigh more than silence. What he destroyed wasn't just the marriage, it was the trust, the pillar of everything we built together. I relived old moments trying to understand where I'd lost control. In truth, I never lost. I just didn't realize he'd never had the courage to be honest. My heart, once full of hope, now turned to ice. I was ready to face the truth head-on. The photo I'd received was more than proof. It was a trigger. Suddenly, all the accumulated signals made sense. The woman's gold bracelet in the image seemed to shine like a sentence. It was as if she'd looked at me through the screen, saying, "He was never just yours." The silence of that discovery weighed more heavily than a scream. I could hear the blood coursing through my veins, my hands trembling, my body demanding a reaction. But I knew. It wasn't time yet. The game was just beginning. I felt anger, yes, but along with it, something new was born. A strength I'd never known, a determination that made me think clearly. I wouldn't chase after cheap explanations. I would observe, calculate, wait. And when the moment came, he would be the one to tremble. My eyes now saw every detail through different filters. His phone ringing, his haste to leave, even the way he adjusted his tie. Nothing went unnoticed anymore. I was no longer the innocent wife who believed in excuses. I was a woman prepared to dismantle every lie. He thought he was in control. But little did he know that the photo had awakened the most dangerous side of me, that of someone wounded but willing to fight. The stage he'd set was beginning to crumble, and I was ready to watch it fall from the front row. What I didn't yet know was how far that lie would take me, because the photo was only the gateway to a much darker labyrinth, and each step I took would bring me closer to secrets that could change not only my marriage, but my entire life. The following nights were marked by suffocating insomnia. I tossed and turned, watching his phone charging beside me, as if it were a bomb about to explode. Each silent notification seemed to carry a secret. My heart beat faster, as if already awaiting the next test. His silence provoked me more than any argument. I began to study every detail of his routine like someone deciphering a riddle. His schedule, his facial expressions, even the way he kept his wallet. He was different, but he tried to feign normalcy. It was almost comical to watch him play the role of the perfect husband, while the mask slipped with every gesture. I just needed patience. Once, I arrived home early without warning. His car was in the garage, but he wasn't in the office, where he claimed to be. I found clothes thrown on the sofa, wine glasses still chilled. The sound of the water running in the bathroom made me shiver. When he came out, he was wearing only a towel, surprised by my presence. He smiled nervously, but didn't explain anything. With each passing day, the act became more obvious. He invented quick trips, urgent meetings that always coincided with holidays or special dates. It was as if he was trying to exclude me from his life in stages. I noticed, but I remained calm. The more he believed in his own charade, the more chances I had of catching him off guard. I decided to adopt the same weapon he used, my cell phone. I installed a discreet app to record calls and track movements. It was risky, but necessary. I no longer wanted to live on assumptions. I needed solid proof, the kind that leaves no room for excuses. And soon, the answers began to appear. His routes didn't match his excuses. While he claimed to be in meetings downtown, the GPS showed him in remote neighborhoods, near hotels and discreet restaurants. Each location was a stab in the back, but also a victory. The truth unfolded with cold, mathematical precision. I was right. It was on one of those nights that I heard something that changed everything. He'd forgotten to record his smartwatch during a call. His voice was lower, softer, and in the background, a feminine laugh echoed. It wasn't business talk. It was intimacy. The proof was there, clear, as if I were inside that room. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Shock mixed with a strange sense of power. I no longer needed assumptions, no longer needed to ask questions. Reality was laid out before me, cruel and indisputable. He had someone else, and he made no effort to hide it. Even so, I pretended. I kept smiling, preparing dinners, taking care of the house as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was no longer the same woman. My every gesture was calculated. Every look, strategy. I let him believe I was still in control, but in reality, I had already taken the reins. To every excuse, I responded calmly. He would say, "It's work," and I would just smile. This calm confused him. He expected screams, expected desperation, but received silence. And this silence left him vulnerable. He didn't know that, by not reacting, I was buying time and weapons against him. The nights in the bedroom became rehearsals for war. I watched him sleep, remembering her hand in the photo, the laughter I heard on the audio. My mind sketched plans, alternatives. I could confront him there, wake him with the truth. But no. I wanted him to sink alone, unaware that his downfall was already certain. The family was beginning to notice small changes. My gaze was distant, my smile restrained. When asked, I changed the subject. No one needed to know yet. This was my battle. And I wanted to win it at the right moment, so forcefully that he would never forget. A family dinner was the height of hypocrisy. He praised my cooking, laughed with his children, told stories as if he were the same man as before. But I saw through it. Every gesture, every word was charged with the lie he carried hidden. It was hard not to scream in front of everyone, but I took a deep breath. His body also betrayed him. Different perfumes, subtle marks on his skin, even scratches he claimed to have at the gym. But I wasn't naive. I knew those marks came from rushed encounters, from stolen moments. With each detail, my anger grew, but along with it, my determination. The night he left his blazer in the car was decisive. In his pocket, I found a restaurant receipt for 2. The date and time coincided with the extra work he claimed to have. The waiter, when discreetly contacted, confirmed, yes, he was here, with a woman with long hair and red nails. It was the same detail as the photo. I felt the web was complete. Each piece, each clue, now formed a single, inescapable narrative. He could try to deny it, but there was no escape. The truth had weight, it had smell, it had sound. And I was the only one carrying this silent arsenal against him. While he slept, I spent hours reviewing the evidence. The photo, the audio recordings, the roots, the receipt. It was like assembling a secret dossier. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I had become a relentless investigator. The kind of woman who refuses to live in illusions. The image of him, smiling beside her, still burned within me. But it no longer paralyzed me. Now it moved me. The pain was turning into fuel and revenge was beginning to take shape. I knew exactly what I needed to do. In that moment, I understood that catching someone wasn't enough. I had to expose them. He had cast me as the naive one, but he would be the one to pay dearly for believing too much in his own deception. His downfall would begin with the same weapon he'd used against me. Image. And as I stared at the reflection of the photo on my phone, I realized this was just the prelude. The true impact was yet to come, and nothing could prepare him for the collapse I was planning. I woke up in the middle of the night to my phone vibrating on my nightstand. Still heavy-eyed, I opened the screen and saw an anonymous notification. It was another photo, but this time it wasn't from a restaurant, nor from discreet encounters. The image showed my husband entering a hotel known for short-term encounters, accompanied by the same woman with the gold bracelet. My entire body shuddered, as if the ground had disappeared beneath me. I sat in bed for minutes, staring at the screen, trying to process the scene. It was no longer just a suspicion or a rumor fueled by traces. It was the definitive confirmation that my life had been divided into 2 parts, before and after this betrayal. My heart raced, but along with the shock came a sense of clarity. I no longer needed justifications, no longer needed to listen to fabricated excuses. The truth was out in the open, and now it was up to me to decide what to do with it. I spent the entire morning in silence, making coffee as if it were an ordinary day. He came down with that practiced smile, asking if I'd slept well. I simply nodded and placed the cup in front of him. As he talked about meetings and deadlines, the image of the hotel burned into my mind. His every word rang false, a poorly written script for a role he could no longer quite pull off. I watched his every move like someone watching an actor about to be booed by the audience. At work, I started receiving messages from friends commenting on rumors circulating. People who didn't even know me personally already knew what was going on. It was as if his charade had taken on a life of its own. spreading through whispers and suspicious glances. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I had become a character in a story no one could ignore. And deep within me, the certainty grew that I needed to transform this pain into something greater. I decided to act calmly, without rushing. I called a trusted lawyer and scheduled a discreet meeting. I brought all the evidence I had gathered: photos, receipts, audio recordings, and messages. His look of astonishment at the sheer volume of evidence. "You have it all here. More than enough." These words gave me unexpected relief. I wasn't just reacting emotionally. I was armed with facts, with a truth impossible to dispute. At home, I maintained my routine as if nothing had changed. He believed he still had control, that I remained blind. But deep inside, my every move was already calculated. Silence had become my greatest weapon. There was no shouting, no direct confrontation. Only a growing distance, which he couldn't explain. And this made him increasingly uneasy. A family dinner further revealed the hypocrisy of the situation. He told funny stories, laughed loudly, trying to maintain his image of the perfect man. But my children could already sense my distant gaze, the rigidity in my shoulders. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with a tension no one could name. I swallowed my food with difficulty, thinking about how everyone there would be affected by the truth. The damage wasn't just mine, it was collective. That night, he tried to approach me in the room. He placed his hand on my shoulder, tried to start a gentle conversation. I took a deep breath and simply said, "I'm tired." I turned onto my side and closed my eyes. The silence that followed was stronger than any argument. I knew he sensed something wrong, but I didn't have the courage to face it. And in that moment, I realized how much of a coward he was. While he slept, I looked at the hotel photo again. Anger burned inside me, but with it, there was also a strange calm. I was no longer just the victim. I was the guardian of the truth, the only one who knew how far that lie went. And I was ready to use it in the most painful way possible. It wouldn't just be a personal discovery, it would be a complete collapse. The next day, the company confirmed the opening of an internal investigation. His involvement with the supplier violated important clauses of the contract. He tried to tell me before I knew, feigning surprise. But I was already prepared. I just listened, without interrupting, like someone watching a play repeated too often. With every word he said, I thought, "The end has already begun, and you didn't even notice." I saw his arrogance wither as he began to receive different looks at work. Friends who had previously praised him now crossed their arms and walked away. The public image he had so carefully built was dissolving, and this hurt him more than any direct confrontation I could have. His downfall was slow, silent, but relentless. I no longer needed to say anything. I just had to wait. His own choices were destroying his reputation. But inside me, the fight wasn't just against him. It was against the pain, against the shame, against the feeling of having been deceived for so long. I needed to be stronger than ever, and I was. Every day, new details emerged. More evidence, more people commenting, more pieces of the truth being revealed. It was as if the universe were conspiring to keep nothing hidden. And I, at the center of it all, watched coldly. I no longer cried, no longer trembled. I simply prepared myself for the final moment. The initial anger transformed into something greater, into a desire for justice, not just personal but social. I wanted other women to see this story and understand that they were not alone, that intuition never fails, that the signs always appear no matter how much they try to erase them, and that silence can be a more powerful weapon than any scream. Deep down, I knew he would still try to defend himself, that he would come with stories, justifications, attempts at manipulation. But I was no longer the same woman who believed his words. I had become someone stronger, more aware, and that left him with no way out. Because no lie can survive in front of open eyes. One night, he finally asked me why I was different. "You're acting strange, what's going on?" I smiled and simply replied, "You know." The silence that followed was suffocating. He swallowed hard, looked away, and said nothing more. In that moment, I realized he already understood the game was over. Still, I knew the ultimate downfall wouldn't come from me, but from the weight of his own choices. The consequences were in motion, unstoppable. I just needed to stay strong, not let myself be swept away by emotion. Every step I took until then brought me closer to the most anticipated moment. the complete collapse of the farce he'd created. And when it finally arrived, I wanted to be ready. I wanted to stand firm, looking him in the eye without wavering. I wanted him to know I saw everything, that nothing escaped, that I wasn't blind, nor weak, nor naive, that I simply waited, patiently, until the truth swallowed him whole. The weight of the hotel photo still followed me like a shadow. But now it wasn't pain. It was fuel. I understood that this was the turning point. There was no more room for illusions, and deep down, I knew the next step would reveal something even more devastating, something even he couldn't control. It was then that I received another anonymous message, this time even more direct. It wasn't just a photo, but a video. My heart raced as I pressed play. What I saw on the screen not only confirmed the betrayal but revealed a secret that could change everything forever. The video wouldn't leave my head. I saw him enter that hotel with the same woman with the gold bracelet, laughing like a lovesick teenager, while I spent sleepless nights believing his lame excuses. The surreptitiously recorded image showed me not only the betrayal, but the intimacy built, the repeated pattern that sustained a second parallel life. It was no longer a casual fling. It was a routine that had been nurtured at my expense. I felt anger rising, but along with it, a cold determination gave me the strength to not crumble. That morning, I made coffee as usual, but inside, I was no longer the same woman. He talked about work, about commitments, and I just watched him like someone analyzing a defendant about to be tried. Every word felt like a poorly rehearsed, a lie told without rehearsal, without conviction. The difference was that now I had enough evidence to dismantle any speech. Silence became my main weapon, and silence made him uncomfortable because he always expected my explosive reaction to turn the tables in his favor. Throughout the day, I reorganized all the material. Photos, audio recordings, receipts, location screenshots. Each piece of evidence was a brick I stacked to build an insurmountable wall against his excuses. I called my lawyer and asked him to initiate legal proceedings discreetly. I no longer sought only to expose the truth emotionally, but also to protect what was rightfully mine, my assets, my dignity, my history. His betrayal wouldn't just remain a source of pain, it would have practical and irreversible consequences. At work, increasingly clear rumors began to circulate. People sent me private messages saying they'd already suspected, that they'd seen things, that they'd chosen to remain silent out of respect. I discovered he wasn't just unfaithful, he was careless, and believed the entire world would be complicit in his silence. Masculine pride blinded him, and it was this blindness that opened all the doors to his downfall. The image he'd built for decades was beginning to crack in public, and I barely needed to move beyond the truth. At home, the tension became unbearable. He'd come in and greet me with a cold kiss, as if following protocol. He'd try to make small talk, but I'd stop responding. With each silence, he'd become more restless, asking if I was acting strangely, if something had happened. I'd simply look him in the eye and say, "You know?" Those 3 words were more devastating than any explicit accusation because the weight of the guilt was entirely on his side. That night, as I lay down, I felt his body no longer seeking mine. He turned to his side, falling asleep quickly, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling. In that dark space, I understood that there was no need for an explosive confrontation. Life was already taking its toll, and all I needed to do was ensure that no one could erase or manipulate the truth. My children noticed my silence. My daughter even asked if everything was okay. I smiled and said, "It's starting to get better." And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. The following days were a succession of masks falling. His friends drifted away, invitations were canceled, coworkers stopped laughing at his jokes. I saw the arrogant glow in his eyes slowly fade, like a flame dying without air. He still tried to maintain control at home, but he no longer had the same confidence. He began to justify himself without me asking, a clear sign that the pressure was destroying him. I listened silently, like someone watching a building collapse in slow motion. I decided I needed to protect not only myself, but also my family. I spoke to my children directly, showing them some evidence, just enough for them to understand the reason for my distancing. It was painful, but necessary. They reacted with a maturity that surprised me, supporting my decision and promising not to leave me to face everything alone. At that moment, I realized that his betrayal wouldn't destroy us, but rather strengthen our bonds. When I finally sat down across from the lawyer, I heard the word strategy for the first time in a different context. It was no longer about gathering evidence, but about how to reposition myself, how to leave that relationship without losing what was rightfully mine. He explained the next steps to me step by step, and I felt each one like a loaded gun. For the first time in months, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. On the way home, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my own reflection. There were signs of fatigue, deep dark circles under my eyes, but there was also a firmness in my gaze. I was no longer the deceived woman. I was the woman who had found out, who had resisted, and who was now prepared to fight back. The silence, the waiting, the pain, everything had transformed me into someone he would no longer recognize. And this would be the greatest surprise of all. What I didn't yet know was that the video I received hid more than just the betrayal. There were details hidden deep within the recording, subtle elements that could open doors to even greater secrets. I wasn't just facing a man's infidelity, but something that could involve other people, other interests, and even risks that went far beyond our relationship. And this would completely change how I approached the next step. Reviewing the video carefully, I noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. In the back of the hotel room, on the table, was a folder of documents bearing his company logo. These weren't just romantic encounters. They involved business deals, contracts, perhaps even fraud. The personal betrayal was mingled with something even darker, a level that surpassed marital pain. My heart raced, because now I had something much bigger in my hands. The images showed him handing papers to that woman, who calmly flipped through the pages. She wasn't just a lover. She was someone directly connected to his professional environment. This explained the excessive caution, the well-crafted lies, and the desperation when I reached for my cell phone. The danger now wasn't just emotional. It was legal. It was social. It was destructive on a scale he never imagined he could control. And I was at the center of this revelation. The anger I felt mingled with a strange sense of mission. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the truth he was hiding from everyone. I knew I needed to act more cautiously than ever, because any false move could put me at risk. The lover wasn't a mere stranger, but a piece in a larger game, and I needed to understand where that board ended. Pain was turning into strategy, and strategy into power. At dinner that night, I sat across from him and watched. He talked about business, about corporate pressures, and I saw the lie oozing out of every detail. The video file loomed in my mind like a ghost. I smiled slightly just to avoid arousing suspicion, but inside my mind screamed. He had no idea I already knew everything, that every word was just another layer of mud over his own ruin. The next day, I took the video to the lawyer. I showed him the file, the papers, explained what I'd noticed. He leaned back in his chair, widened his eyes, and said, "This changes everything." The marital betrayal was turning into a possible corruption case, into a web of dangerous interests. I was no longer dealing with just an unfaithful man, but with someone who had criminally mixed his double life with his professional world. My stomach turned to ice, but my determination only grew. With each detail revealed, his downfall became inevitable. I thought about the children, how painful it would be to discover that their father was not only a traitor in his marriage, but also in his work, in his life, in his ethics. The image of the exemplary man shattered before me, like a mirror shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. It was impossible to go back, impossible to ignore. The truth was already exposed, and I could no longer close my eyes. I began receiving messages from unknown numbers. Some were threatening, others urged silence. I felt fear, of course, but also a strange confirmation. I was getting too close to something they didn't want to come to light. I took a deep breath and decided I wouldn't give in. If they were trying to silence me, it was because I held something too valuable in my hands, and this only reinforced the need to continue. At home, the atmosphere became unbearable. He sensed my coldness and tried to regain control with small gestures. He made dinners, complimented me, feigned interest. But it was too late. Every gesture felt false, every smile a mask I knew would soon fall. The distance between us was now an unbridgeable chasm, and I no longer felt like building any bridges. Conversations with my daughter became more frequent. She noticed my distant look and asked firmly, "Mom, are you going to let him continue?" I held his hand and replied, "No, but it's not the right time yet." She nodded, understanding without needing more words. Her support gave me strength and at the same time a huge responsibility. I couldn't fail. I needed to show that we were not victims, but survivors. That week, I received an anonymous call. The firm male voice simply said, "You have no idea what you're messing with." Before I could ask, he hung up. My heart raced, fear shot through my spine like lightning. But with him came the certainty. If they were watching me, it was because the truth I had in my hands was capable of bringing down more than one marriage. And I wouldn't back down. I decided to keep copies of all the tests in different places. Hidden pen drives, files in the cloud, sealed envelopes with trusted people. If something happened to me, the truth wouldn't die with it. This preparation brought me calm, as if I finally had security against any attempt at erasure. His secret was now shielded, and I was the guardian of this time bomb about to explode. In the company, the views on him changed drastically. People were already talking, gossip was growing, and the whispers were deafening. I saw the weight of pressure on his face. He tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed a growing fear. The man who once prided himself on being unshakable now trembled with every step. And I watched in silence, like someone watching an empire in ruins. One night, I decided to confront him indirectly. I placed the photo of the hotel on the table during dinner, without saying anything. He froze, his hand shook, and tried to hide it by asking where it had come from. I looked hard and just said, "You know." The silence that followed was devastating. He didn't eat, he didn't speak, he just got up and left. It was the clearest confirmation of all. He was cornered. My trusted friend stopped by the house and said something I'll never forget. "He no longer has power over you. It's you who does." These words echoed in my mind, reinforcing the feeling that I had turned the tide. She was no longer the deceived woman who sought explanations. She was the woman who held in her hands the key to his ruin. And that changed everything. The atmosphere at home got worse every day. He avoided contact, spent hours on his cell phone, nervous, deleting messages. I just watched, recording every detail in silence. There was no longer room for discussions, only for evidence. The chasm between us was irreversible, and I knew that soon everything would come to a head. It was just a matter of time. In a moment of desperation, he tried to reverse the game. He said I was distant, that maybe there was another man, that I was the one hiding something. I smiled wryly and replied, "The projection is yours, not mine." He was speechless, staring at me with a look of hatred and helplessness. For the first time, I realized that he knew he could no longer manipulate me. This silent victory gave me more strength than any open confrontation. The lawyer called me confirming that the case had legal weight. The company documents involved in the meetings could lead to a serious investigation. I listened in silence, but inside, a chill ran through my body. It was no longer just a matter of personal revenge, but a scandal that could have repercussions on many levels. His betrayal was just the visible tip of a huge iceberg. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the room, reviewing the tests, thinking about the next step. I knew I needed to be careful, but also firm. I couldn't back down now. I couldn't give in to fear. If she had gotten this far, it was because she was ready to face whatever came her way. The sound of the clock ticking in the silence of the house was like a countdown. I looked out the window and saw the city lit up, each building with stories hidden behind its walls. I thought about how many women were in that same position, suspicious, suffering in silence, being manipulated by lies. I felt a wave of indignation wash over me. My story would not be erased, and I would make a point of transforming it into a cry that would resonate with them all. When I closed my eyes, I made a decision. There would be no going back. Exposure would be inevitable, and I would choose the moment to light the fuse myself. He thought he still had time, but the truth was already coursing through the city's veins. And what I had discovered in the video was just the beginning of something that would explode far beyond our home. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling that the storm was about to break. The air in the house seemed heavy, as if each wall carried secrets that could no longer be kept silent. He sat at the table, playing on his cell phone with shaking hands, trying to look busy. The smell of coffee couldn't hide the atmosphere of tension that filled every corner. I knew that would be a decisive day. I grabbed my bag and left without explaining. He asked where I was going, but I just said, rang out some things. Deep down, I wanted him to feel the insecurity he always caused me. With every step I took on the sidewalk, it was as if I was moving away from the submissive version of myself. I was no longer the woman waiting for answers. I was the woman carrying all the answers. At the lawyer's office, I opened the folder with the documents and handed over the video. He analyzed every detail and said that it could open a serious investigation. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a breach of trust, an ethical violation, possible corruption. My married life had turned into an affair capable of resonating in spheres I never imagined. Personal pain was now mixed with social impact. As I listened to his words, I felt a mixture of fear and strength. I knew it wouldn't be easy to face what was coming, but I also knew there was no going back. Each piece of evidence I had gathered was like an armed bomb, and it would be up to me to choose the moment to detonate it. The consequences would be devastating, but I was no longer afraid of destruction. What I feared was continuing to live a lie. I came home in the middle of the afternoon and found him on the couch, nervous, with his eyes fixed on the television without paying attention to anything. He looked at me as if waiting for a verdict. I just dropped the key on the table and went upstairs without saying anything. The silence was crueler than any accusation. He knew he was losing control, and it was eating him up inside. That night, I sat on the bed and watched him sleep. His features, once familiar and comfortable, now repulsed me. I thought about all the years dedicated, every sacrifice made, every promise broken. My chest hurt, but alongside the pain was a spark of freedom. I no longer depended on that man to exist. His lie had freed me from an invisible prison. The next day, I received an unexpected call. A woman in a firm voice said, "I went through that with him too." My heart raced. She said she had been deceived in a similar way, manipulated with the same words, destroyed by the same lies. It was like hearing my own story told by another mouth. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't the only victim. We arranged to meet at a discreet cafe. When I saw her, I saw in her eyes the same pain that I carried in myself. She showed messages, photos, evidence. He repeated the same script with different women, as if it were a manual for emotional destruction. My stomach dropped, but I also felt a strange solidarity. His betrayal wasn't just marital, it was a pattern of predatory behavior. As she spoke, I remembered every time I was called paranoid, every time my suspicions were ridiculed. Now I had proof not only of the betrayal, but of the cycle of manipulation he perpetuated. He was not just an unfaithful husband, he was a compulsive liar, a man who built his identity on illusions, and his fall needed to be exemplary. I returned home determined not to hide anything anymore. Not his, but the world's. The secret was no longer mine to keep. It was a matter of justice, of exposing the truth so that no one else would be deceived. I walked through the rooms of the house and noticed how each object carried the memory of a hoax. The photos, the gifts, everything seemed contaminated, and I knew that soon all this would cease to exist. He tried to start a conversation at night, but I cut him off with a look. He just said, "The mask has fallen." He was left unresponsive, stuttering, searching for words that didn't come. His silence was the greatest confession I could have. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to accuse. All he had to do was look fixedly and say that. His lie had ended inside the house, even if he was still trying to support himself outside. The next day, I published a short sentence on my social networks. Intuition never fails. I didn't name names. I didn't make accusations. I just let the truth hang in the air. But people understood. Messages began to arrive. Questions emerged, and the web of lies began to collapse on all sides. He realized quickly and became desperate, trying to control a narrative that was no longer in his hands. As he tried to cover his tracks, I received more and more messages with proof. Prints, testimonies, reports. People who had previously been silent now spoke. The sandcastle crumbled under the weight of the tide of truth. I no longer needed to move a single piece. The very network he created was taking charge of destroying him. And that was more powerful than any planned revenge. I saw in his eyes the transformation of arrogance into despair. The self-assured man had disappeared. All that was left was someone lost, cornered, aimless. He no longer knew how to control it, because the power of lies only lasts while the truth sleeps. And now the truth was awake, hungry, ready to devour him. I watched everything with an almost frightening calm. Even so, deep down, a shadow of pain still existed. It was impossible to erase years of history, of memories, of promises. But every tear that flowed now was accompanied by strength. I wasn't just crying for him, I was crying for myself, for the woman who believed, for the naivety I carried. And with each tear, I felt my skin getting tougher, more prepared to face what was to come. At work, the pressure on him increased. Reports asked for explanations. Meetings demanded transparency. The lover, previously hidden, now appeared in the rumors as an accomplice. What was once a hotel secret now became a corporate agenda. His life was unraveling before his very eyes, and nothing he said could stop the flood. He had dug his own social and professional grave. That night, I sat with my children and told them the complete truth. I showed evidence, explained what I had discovered. It was painful but freeing. They cried. They were angry, but they hugged me tightly. They said I wasn't alone, that we would be a united family despite him. That moment gave me certainty that the true bond had not been destroyed. He had lost his wife, but he had also lost his family. After that, I looked at him and realized that there was nothing left to save. The man I knew had died a long time ago. What remained was a shadow, a hoax sustained by lies. I no longer felt love, only repulsion. And along with the repulsion, a deep desire to show the world the truth that I carried in my hands. I decided that I wouldn't let his fall be just intimate. Exposure would be inevitable, and I would control how it happened myself. I took the most impactful evidence and prepared it to send to the right people. Not to destroy just for revenge, but to show that lies have limits, that no one deceives everyone forever. And when it came to light, it would be devastating. The phone vibrated once again that night. It was a new anonymous message. When I opened it, I saw a different photo, taken from inside the company. He was holding hands with her in a hallway, not even trying to hide. My heart raced. That was no longer hidden betrayal. It was mockery. It was provocation. And at that moment, I realized that the end was much closer than I had imagined. The photo of the company hallway was the missing trigger. He no longer worried about hiding it. He no longer made an effort to maintain the appearance of a man of integrity. He walked hand in hand with her in a public place, as if impunity were a shield. That image disgusted me more than all the others combined. Because there wasn't just betrayal there was defiance, affront, absolute disrespect. I took a deep breath and realized that my pain was no longer intimate, it was collective. He exposed me not only as a betrayed wife, but as a woman reduced to the role of involuntary accomplice in his charade. People at the company knew, rumors spread, and every minute my name was mentioned in corners of corridors. I couldn't allow my silence to turn into complicity. It was time to act. I sent the photo to the lawyer and received confirmation back. This ends any margin of defense. The legal weight of that evidence was overwhelming. There was no way to justify the gesture, no way to claim coincidence. The game was over. The difference is that he didn't yet know he was about to lose everything. Yes, I could already feel the bitter taste of victory approaching. At home, he tried to pretend normality, as if nothing had happened. He prepared dinners, set the table, turned on the television as if he were an ordinary husband. But each gesture was a grotesque theater, and I no longer applauded. I watched in silence, knowing his days of lying were numbered. The stage was set, and the curtain would fall soon. One night, I sat across from him and asked, "Was it worth it?" He froze. His eyes wavered, but he tried to laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about," he murmured, his voice shaking. I just got up and left the room, without needing to say anything else. His cowardice spoke for itself. The silence was more devastating than any argument. In the following days, external pressure increased. I received calls from acquaintances asking if I was okay, messages of support from women who had been through the same thing. The network of solidarity grew, and each word received was like a flame that rekindled my strength. I wasn't the only one fighting against a cowardly man's lies. And now I had an invisible army at my side. Meanwhile, he began to waste away. The tired face, the lost look, the impatient gestures. I tried to erase traces, but it was too late. With each movement, he created more suspicion. With each justification, he revealed more weakness. The empire he built with empty words crumbled beneath his feet. I decided to schedule a meeting with the company's management, taking all the evidence. I entered that room with my head held high and the dossier in hand. I showed the photos, the receipts, the videos. I didn't need to exaggerate. I didn't need to dramatize. All we had to do was put the facts on the table. The silence of those present was eloquent. They knew they had a serious problem on their hands. On the way home, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I had taken the missing step. I had taken the weight of protecting someone who never protected me off my shoulders. Now the bigger gear would start turning, and I would just watch. He had no idea that, while he slept peacefully, his professional life had already been sentenced. That night, I prepared the dinner table as usual, but with an almost cruel calm. I placed his plate, poured the wine, and sat down in front of him. He smiled, trying to maintain his pose, but I just stared at him. "Is everything in order?" he asked, suspicious. I just replied, "Not yet, but it will be." The silence that followed was the beginning of his downfall. I started to observe how he moved around the house as if he were a stranger. His every step was calculated, his every word was measured. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't figure it out. This slow despair was the punishment he never imagined he would receive. I didn't need to raise my voice because fear was already doing the work for me. The lover, in turn, began to appear more in conversations. People from the company commented, neighbors murmured, even family members questioned. Her name was associated with his like an indelible mark. They had exposed themselves too much, and now they were trapped together, in a union of shame and scandal. To me, this was just further confirmation that there was no way out for him. One day, he came home early, trying to surprise me with flowers. He placed the bouquet on the table and smiled, offering a general apology. I looked at the flowers as if looking at a strange, meaningless object. "There's no point anymore," he said calmly. He swallowed hard, lowered his head, and remained silent. The pathetic attempt only reinforced how much control he had lost. Little by little, I realized that I no longer felt the same pain as before. The hurt turned into strength, the anger into strategy. I no longer cried for him. I no longer cared about what he did. My focus was just to make sure the truth got out, that no one was fooled like I was. The freedom it brought me was more powerful than any revenge. One afternoon, I received an anonymous envelope on my doorstep. Inside, there were copies of emails exchanged between him and his lover, discussing contracts and favors. The betrayal went beyond the personal and reached the field of open corruption. My body shook as I realized the gravity of it. Now I had in my hands not only proof of infidelity, but also of the crime. I showed the documents to the lawyer, who confirmed this could turn into a legal scandal. The weight of the situation exceeded any limit I had imagined. I wasn't just dealing with an adulterous man, but someone involved in a scheme that could upend entire careers. The scale of the discovery scared me, but it also strengthened me, because I had the key piece in my hands. At home, tension reached unbearable levels. He avoided looking at me. He would stay locked in his office for hours, leaving without saying where he was going. I no longer asked anything. I just mentally recorded every detail. Silence became a battlefield, where I always emerged victorious. He was a man in ruins, and I just watched. The anonymous messages returned, more threatening than ever. "Stop while you can," said one. But I was no longer afraid. If they tried to silence me, it was because I was exactly on the right path. I kept the messages, gave them to the lawyer, and remained firm. The fear they tried to impose on me only reinforced my conviction that the truth needed to be exposed. I looked in the mirror that night and saw a transformed woman. She was no longer the naive wife who believed in empty promises. He was someone who survived the fire, who carried in his hands the flame capable of setting fire to the empire of lies. The pain was still there, but it no longer dominated me. Now I was the master of my own destiny. And it was in this state of clarity that I understood. The next step would be devastating, because the truth I carried would not just destroy one man, but an entire network of interests. And when that castle fell, no one would emerge unscathed. The impact of the emails hit me like a bomb. I already knew about the betrayal. I had already seen the meetings with my own eyes. But now the thing went beyond the personal barrier. Those contracts showed favors, exchanges of interest, corruption disguised as romance. Not only did he destroy my marriage, he also irreversibly tarnished his own career. It was proof that I was living next to a stranger. In the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense. He analyzed every detail of the papers, marking passages with a serious look. "This isn't just adultery, it's fraud," he said, resting his hands on the table. My heart raced, but anger turned fear into energy. If he believed he could fool me forever, now he would be exposed in front of everyone, with no escape. I felt like I was getting closer and closer to the end. At home, the environment became unbearable. He avoided eye contact, made excuses to lock himself in his office, and spent hours on mysterious phone calls. I just watched, more and more certain that something bigger than myself was about to explode. He walked around the house like a ghost, restless, without peace. He was the living image of a man cornered by his own lie. One night, I sat across from him and decided to throw shade. Funny how some business seems too personal, don't you think? He looked at me, pale, unable to respond. He just looked away and pretended to look for something on his cell phone. I smiled slightly, because I noticed in the tremor of his hands that he already knew I had found out more than I should have. The mask was falling off. The following days were a parade of hypocrisies. He still tried to maintain the routine, set the table, pretend to be affectionate. But with every false gesture, I felt disgusted. The man I once called my husband was gone. What remained was a desperate figure, trying to hold on to a castle that was already collapsing. With every second, the doom drew closer, and I watched in silence. I started receiving messages from people at the company confirming the rumors. Some said they had already seen the two together. Others talked about suspicious contracts. What was once just an intimate betrayal was now a scandal spreading through hallways and meetings. And I, from within my pain, understood that I was not alone. The world was beginning to see who he really was. One afternoon, he came home upset. He threw the folder on the table, shouted that everyone was against him, that there was a conspiracy. I just watched him, silently. The man who once accused me of being paranoid now saw enemies on all sides. The irony was cruel, but also delicious. He was drowning in the very poison he poured over me. I decided not to react to his outbursts. Every scream, every crossed word, only served to show his despair. I didn't need to say anything. Silence became a mirror in which he saw his own ruin reflected. He began to realize that he no longer had power over me, and that destroyed him more than any direct confrontation. One night, I received another anonymous message. It was a clearer video than all the previous ones. It showed not only him with his lover, but also a meeting involving company documents. Important people were present, and that meant the scheme was much bigger than I thought. My body shook, but not from fear, but from the certainty that I was facing something explosive. I called my lawyer immediately. He listened silently, then replied, "Get ready. This is about more than just a divorce. This is going to make headlines." My heart accelerated. I had never sought fame or scandal, but I knew that now there was no way around it. He wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was the tip of a rotten iceberg about to emerge. The next day, I noticed that neighbors were whispering when I passed by. The rumor was already on the street, spreading like wildfire. Looks of pity, of solidarity, of curiosity. But I didn't lower my head. I walked firmly, because I knew I was carrying something that went far beyond my personal story. The shame was no longer mine. It was all his. In the evening, he tried once again to reverse the narrative. He said I was making things up, that I had framed him. With each word, he seemed more fragile. I just responded, "The evidence speaks for itself." His silence was the clearest confession I've ever received. I didn't need any more screaming. I didn't need any more tears. The truth was already recorded indisputable. Every day, new messages arrived. People who had also been harmed by him came to me. Other women, other businesses, other lies. It was as if the network of corruption and manipulation he had built had begun to unravel on its own. And I was there, in the eye of the hurricane, ready to watch the complete collapse. I started organizing a second, even heavier dossier. This time, it wasn't just about betrayal, but about corporate crimes. Each document, each testimony was a key piece. When I finished, I looked at that pile of evidence and realized that it held not just the end of a marriage, but the end of a career, of an entire reputation. The fall would be resounding. He noticed my definitive distance. He tried to get closer, asked for forgiveness, cried. But her tears no longer touched me. It was too late for remorse. Each tear seemed more like a desperate attempt to manipulate, to recover something he himself destroyed. I just looked at him coldly, offering no comfort. He was the one who needed to carry the weight of his own abyss. At one point, he tried to escape. He said he needed to travel, that he wanted to think better about everything. I knew it was another lie, another attempt to hide from the truth. I smiled and said, "Go if you want, but the truth will find you wherever you are." He swallowed hard, and I saw the terror in his eyes. The net was set, and there was no way to escape. Each night, my body shook less. The fear that consumed me before turned into strength. She was no longer the betrayed woman. She was the woman who held the truth, who carried in her hands the weapon capable of dismantling an empire of lies. I didn't cry anymore. I was just waiting for the right moment to drop the bomb. The threats continued, but now they sounded like distant echoes. I was already prepared. I had already distributed evidence. I had already shielded the truth. Nothing could silence me. They might try to intimidate me, but the network of people around me grew, ready to bear the weight of the revelation. Fear had changed sides. When I lay down that night, I closed my eyes and felt something different. Peace. Not because the war was over, but because I knew I had already won. He hadn't completely fallen yet, but the fall was inevitable. What was about to happen would be bigger than anything I could imagine. And it was with this thought that I received the last anonymous message. "Tomorrow everything comes to a head." My heart stopped for a second. I knew that wasn't just a promise, it was a sentence. The whole world was about to know the truth. The next morning, I woke up with my heart racing. Notifications exploded on the cell phone, and each new message was a fragment of the bomb that had exploded. News sites, peer groups, family members, everyone shared the scandal. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about corruption, fraud, and lying. His double life was now on display for the entire world to see. As I read the headlines, I felt a mixture of pain and relief. The weight of years of silence had finally turned into a voice. I was no longer the deceived wife, I was the witness who carried the truth. It hurt to see our history exposed, but it hurt much more to think about how I would have lived if I had remained silent. The truth, no matter how harsh it was, set me free. He, on the other hand, was collapsing. He received non-stop calls, tried to justify himself, screamed into the phone like a cornered animal. The man who called me paranoid now found himself surrounded by evidence he couldn't deny. The arrogance melted away, and all that was left in his place was a small, fragile, and demoralized man. I saw before me the ruin that he himself built. I sat down with my children and said that now life would go on differently. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be true. I promised I would never again allow our family to be built on lies. They hugged me with tears in their eyes, and in that gesture I felt confirmation that I had won. Not a victory against him, but a victory over myself, over the fear that paralyzed me. And then, looking out the window, I silently asked myself, how many women still ignore the signs? How many remain trapped in toxic relationships, manipulated by the fear of facing the truth? And if it were you, what would you do? Would you tell someone or keep it inside yourself until your soul rots? The answer is not easy, but I know mine. I will never close my eyes to the truth again.